Welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 323rd New Social Environment. I am Jess Chen, Events Assistant here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation between Yasi Alipour, Paul D. Miller, and Okwui Okpokwasili. We're also thrilled to have the poet Ty Cooper here, who will read to close today's program. We've started all of our events with two important acknowledgements. The first is that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. The second is an acknowledgement that Black Lives Matter. The heart of both of these acknowledgements is a commitment to the liberation of the oppressed and solidarity for all who struggle for freedom, in recognition that when it comes to liberation, our histories never unfold in isolation. In that spirit, I encourage you all to check out the chat for a living document of resources and actions. And now to introduce today's guests and hosts. Brooklyn-based performing artist Okwui Okpokwasili works at the intersection of theater, dance, and installation. Iranian artist, writer, and folder Yasi Alipour currently lives in Brooklyn and wonders about paper, politics, and performance. Last but certainly not least, composer, multimedia artist, and writer Paul D. Miller, aka DJ Spooky, immerses audiences in a blend of genres, global culture, and environmental and social issues. Yasi and Paul, take it away.
All right. Well, first and foremost, Yasi, good to see you. And Oakley, thank you so much for joining us. Yasi had a couple of specific questions, but I want to kind of do something where it's like a free-for-all kind of conversational dialectic. You've spoken sometimes about the Bronx Gothic as being sort of an ontological crisis. And I was really fascinated with that kind of subjective interpretation of movement. If you look at stuff like Gaga, which is a dance out of Israel, or Buto, which is out of post-World War II Japan, there's a kind of a frenetic kind of frozen moments in your style. And I'd love to kind of riff on that for a second. Maybe from an autobiographical mixed with a little bit of the actual description of the performance.
Yeah, no, that's I love yes, I love that. Let's start that way because I think Bronx Gothic was definitely, my attempt to sort of mine a psychic space that I feel um, as a black woman, as a young black woman, that I navigated, and along with the people that I know navigate, many of the people I grew up with navigated, particularly around how the site of the body, where's the space of liberation, who possesses this body, and how are you in turn possessed by certain forces in the world. And I think that I really wanted to also play with duration. How does the body break apart? Thinking about adolescence, right? Both a moment where, particularly in the city, young black girls who start to develop early are, they are sort of bereft of childhood. They're made adults. They're made complicit in, I think, some of the abuse that happens to them. They're projected as being complicit in it. Their bodies are also, like women, kind of possessed by multiple people, seeing it, shouting at you as you're moving through the space. And yet, there's also, where's the space of like a sexual awakening? Where is the sense where you can explore your desire if you have it? And so I was really just sort of thinking about that space that kind of bonds and links a kind of burgeoning sexuality and desire with violence, how to navigate that terrain. But I spent some time in Japan, years and years ago on the body weather farm with Min Tanaka, and then I did some workshops and studied with Kazuo Ono's son Yoshito Ono in Yokohama, and there was definitely there was kind of a bright. I mean, there are dark spaces, but the idea of trying to find image work, kind of building movement from a space of the imaginary, right? And so thinking about a space too that is almost a private imaginary space, but you are in public, right? And so there, you're kind of how do you occupy both the private and the public, right? How do you is there a space to get lost? Where's that field in between? I think maybe some people sometimes I want to forget that there is a public, right? Like the idea is if I can mine a kind of the psychic space by working with imagery, um, I don't know, can there be an opening, a portal? And so whereas sometimes when I was on the body weather farm, we were dealing with images, we were thinking about, a small man walking through, walking from into your right ear through your left ear, maybe a snake in your spine, smoke in your arms, a garden growing out of the crown of your head. Like, what is it really to think about being in those sensations, and then to get so deeply into those sensations that all language is lost, and wherever you're traveling can be also a mystery to you. But definitely the people that are watching or witnessing have no idea what kind of rigor and investigation that you're doing. But for me with Bronx Gothic, I was trying to think of, like even a twerk gone wrong, right? Like, how do I take some of those things that can be easily identified or marked as urban, as something that, Black people, Black girls in particular possess, and try in some way to put that in my body and stay in it long enough so that it kind of totally disintegrates and becomes something other, and something even I, in a way, cannot cannot predict, right? What is it doing? All I know is that at the end of it, I'm bound. I'm undone with sweat. But I know, okay, the task, is to work here for half an hour, right? And so I don't know. That's. I mean, I just
Yeah.
feel, yeah. I just think that, what is it to try to kind of navigate a space where you're not looking at yourself from the outside, and obviously as someone who does performance and works with dance and works with theater or movement and text, um, as a Black woman, what is a space of liberation? What is a space where I can actually, and when I'm bringing other people, how can we be in a psychic space, in a psychic exchange, and give space for that practice and not worry about what it looks like, not worry about the polish, but totally investigate in the practice and know that we're breaking through? I don't know. Or we don't know if we're breaking through. We can try. It's so funny because Carla Peterson, who is here, has supported my work. She's at Mansi and has given me the space in residencies. It's crazy, right? It's like a choreographic center in fucking Florida, Florida State University in Tallahassee. No offense, Florida, but you're really disappointing. But I think, like, so there's also, how do you also, as someone who, as movement, as like dance, is kind of like, the dirty stepchild in the corner. No offense to stepchildren, but it's just like, if someone leaves you and doesn't give you any resources and gives you no love, you're fucking left dirty in a corner. Sometimes I feel like that's what dance is as a genre in the collective kind of, space of artistic and cultural practices. And so to have places like Mansi where you can go for 2 weeks and just work and investigate and navigate, and just, for me, I could take 2 hours every day and just do this quake, do this thing, and see what happens, So it's also, luckily, I've had that, so
Okay.
that space of not being able to, not looking at yourself, trying to not look at yourself and have a practice and an experience, also, like, you fucking need resources.
Right.
But sorry, that's it. Sorry.
Great. No, not at all. Paul, do you mind if I jump in?
Yeah, go. Yeah.
Great. So yeah, you just mentioned the quake, or this kind of twerk gone wrong in the beginning of Bronx Gothic, like this 30 minutes of moving. And sometimes you talk about it as like a portal opening, and there's like this multitude and like intensity, like entering the space with you. And then I'm thinking about the piece you had now more than a year ago, last February, with Dance Space, where you were doing curatorial, kind of curatorial work. You had activators, the utterance of the chorus. So
Yeah, that was the platform series, right?
Yeah.
Utterances from the chorus, which is taken from this Idea Hartman book,
right. So I
Wayward
found
Lives,
this.
Beautiful Experiments.
So I found this with your help. I have this quote from Sadia that I wanted to share with everyone around the chorus, because I feel like it's the right way to ground us here. And then I have a million questions. So I'm gonna just try reading it. This is Sadia Hartman from Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments. The chorus bears all of it for us. The Greek etymology of the word chorus refers to dance within an enclosure. What better articulates the long history of struggle the ceaseless practice of Black radicalism and refusal, the tumult and upheaval of open rebellion, then the acts of collaboration and improvisation that unfolds within the space of enclosure. The chorus is the vehicle for another kind of story, not of the great man or the tragic hero, but one in which all modalities play a part, where the headless group incites change, when the untranslatable songs and seeming nonsense makes good the promise of revolution. I'm thinking about the parts of Bronx Gothic, like where it feels like the narrative is falling apart, where these characters are merging. Also thinking about the scene where it's like anger expressed. There's this like beating and your body performing it in ways that almost feels nonsensical. It's like almost illegible, but we're very within it, like the endurance of your body. And then I'm thinking about that in relationship to those performances where a lot of people were speaking and singing and moving and listening to each other together, and then the audience could join them or like walk, like all those boundaries kind of clash. So I'm thinking about all the ways that you work with these histories of erasure, of upheavals, but rather than offering alternative narratives, you bring us into this portal where it's like multitude, where it's fragmented, when it's in many bodies, even if you're the solo performer. I don't know, I wanted to hear about the chorus.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yes, the chorus is, I just feel like we're all born of the chorus, right? We enter in linked to the chorus. And I think, particularly coming out of the pandemic, it's interesting, right? Because that whole platform, Utterances from the Chorus, also contained sort of spaces for different artists to share their practices, their embodied practices, right? So in some way, that platform was about sort of giving some kind of care and primacy to what was going on in the bodies, and there are differently abled bodies that were going to be performing and doing things, but how do we kind of encounter each other kind of in the flesh? And of course COVID made all of that come to a rough end. But I guess it's almost like a mystical, some of it is mystical, right? The truth is we are all a part of a chorus. But then there's also a part of me that adores working in choruses. I grew up singing in choruses. And I was really interested in trying to make a chorus that had no choir leader, right? Could you make a space where people made the song as they sang it, right? And so the particular practice I was doing, sitting on a man's head, was revolving around a question of what do you carry and how in turn does that carry you? So we would give, so there was an enclosure. Speaking of the choral enclosure, we constructed an enclosure. Outside of the enclosure, we had notebooks where people could sit by themselves and sort of answer that question and write in notebooks, maybe even look at other people's answers, just think about it, a space of contemplation. And then an artist activator would come out of the enclosure and just sort of gently ask if they would like to join, or gently ask if, the reflections that they had written in the notebook, if they would like to share them. And sometimes people shared them, sometimes they didn't. They talked around it, about it. But the idea was that when they entered into the enclosure, right, there was the kind of resonance of this conversation, the resonance of this private relationship that then could come into the enclosure and form or add to like a long and a collective song, because that practice was a 4-hour practice. And I think even sometimes if someone didn't enter, there's a sense of that. I was really interested in considering how do we make space for the individual and that particular, and the imagination of the individual, but also recognize the relationship, between the multitudes, and how how being sort of deeply connected to what your sensing and sensory experience, memory experience as an individual is, and that's not in conflict with being in some kind of accord or discord with community, right? So I wanted to make a space of that was playing in that field, right? And sometimes you'd be in that space, people would start shouting and screaming or laughing, right? That is also a part of a collective song. And I think it came from the investigation I was doing into the 1929 Women's War in Nigeria, where a collective of women came together to protest colonial practices, that were basically threatening, like that were an existential threat to their culture. And in fact, let's just say that maybe those colonial practices that they were concerned with and protesting against did win out. Because even when I was speaking to my parents about this war, a lot of people don't have a memory of it. They don't talk about, you know, what these women were doing. They don't understand that it was a precursor to colonial, anti-colonial struggles that really started to emerge in the 50s and 60s in the Africas and the Americas and Asia. So I was kind of thinking about what it means to have that erasure. But one of the practices that they did was called sitting on a man. And the women would go into the private space of a particularly powerful man who was a representative of the colonial government. And they would stay there and sing and just, you know, sing out the depravities of the man or what they wanted changed, and they wouldn't leave it. So it was a duration. They wouldn't leave until the man offered some kind of redress, right? So that was also a durational practice. But in that context, women came with a very specific thing that they wanted to say. I mean, it actually made me think of the moment where Christian Nielsen, who was the head of Homeland Security, when we all discovered that the Trump administration had been violently separating children from their parents. Some of what those activists did was they went to the home of Christian Nielsen and they played the screams and cries of those children. So in my mind, I was like, oh, this must have been something like what sitting on a man would have been. But I also feel like I can't do that, right? I'm not necessarily an activist, but I thought, what is the space that happens before people become clear about the exact language they need to use to make a particular change? Again, what is that space of coming to know oneself and coming to understand one's relationship to a larger community? What is the space to kind of have almost a sea of voices and cries, right? And almost be in a kind of, I don't even want to say repose, but be in some listening, a space of listening with intense generosity. Like, what is it, you know, can we make that space? Because before we understand what we have to do, we have to somehow hear each other or build the capacity to hear and speak with each other. Do you know? So I really felt this space was that. And a space of silence. There was silence in it. And just walking next to each other, being next to each other. That energetic, you know, to have strangers. We had artist activators who were our kinds of, they were people who were kind of holding the scaffolding together, right? Sounding together. We had actually a dedicated chorus within who would kind of try to keep a particular kind of energy in the space, but then we had people who were moving out to sort of be to liaise with the public, or I would call them, they were our guests. And so we were really just, you know, it was just sometimes it could be such a luminous space, right? Of just being near people. Sometimes you knew them or you didn't know them. Sometimes you knew them, but you had never known them in that kind of space. You know, sometimes people would come in there and not say a word. Some people would come in there and moan and cry. Some people would like laugh. And some people that you didn't know sang would just sing, and then they would sing with you and there would be a chorus, you know. And in the particular clip that I've shown you, we found that people were speaking of breath. Give me breath. And this was, you know, and so this was happening. That was a recording that happened in March or late February. And George Floyd, we know, happened in May. And beyond all of the deaths that have, you know, accumulated and have, you know, that are kind of another layer of ground in this country and in the world. But the fact that, you know, this concern, this cry, is always in all of us and has been in so many of us, particularly people of color. And so it was amazing to me to go back to those videos and hear that cry for breath. Give me breath, breath. I want breath. You know, so it was quite. Anyway, I guess I just went on. But
amazing.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Is there any opening for anybody else in this conversation?
Let me just intervene for just 2 seconds, because there's so many issues in what you just mentioned that I want to unpack. Well, first and foremost is the connection to theater. I mean, to respectfully disagree, I actually do think you are an activist. And you just said you aren't an activist, but I think that we think about what your work is doing with the sort of catalyzing change of perception, and that's half the battle right now. I mean, we're speaking on the eve of Juneteenth, which has now been made into a federal holiday. They just signed on that with Kamala Harris and so on. And just for those in the audience who aren't aware, that was the time where they celebrate the freeing of the slaves. That was June 19th, 1865. But to me, Okwui, this is something, Yasi, I'd love for you to sort of jump in as well. There's the theatrical component of your work, whether you were looking at people like Aristophanes with the Lysistrata, where the women won't have sex. You know, it's a famous one, until the warriors stop having war. Or like even Gandhi's Salt Marsh, where in 1930, he's just trying to figure out how to peacefully transition the culture. So your stuff with the revenge dance and some of the other pieces that are dealing with, when I've watched them, there's this kind of like seizure going on. It's like you're taking still motion, like a camera, just getting small snapshots of a movement. And like, I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of the other Nigerian activists, like Ken Saro-Wiwa, who died tragically because of his protesting against shell oils, extractive practices. I believe he's Ogoni. And you're kind of an alchemy. That's kind of what I think of you. You're sort of a communal alchemy. And there's a way that your work, it kind of deals with diaspora, but condenses and conveys it in a very powerful, distinct moment. So could you riff on your some of the other pieces like Pent-Up, the Revenge Dance, and maybe some of your more multimedia work as well?
Yeah. Do you want Yasi to also add to this, Paul?
Yeah,
or should I?
Both. Just Yasi is now an Okwui scholar, by the way. So
I would not dare. No, I jumped in before because we do have a link of the video you referred to.
Exactly.
But I want to hear your thoughts on that. So Louis is going to put that in the chat. But that's all. Yeah, I want to hear your thoughts. I like the alchemy.
No. I mean, I love the idea of alchemy, and I think we all are kind of alchemy. I mean, and particularly, it's true that my I exist in a kind of in between space culturally. It's like you go to Nigeria, people say, well, you're not Nigerian, but you're here in America, and your parents and family say you're not American. You know what I mean? It's just like, okay, I guess I can't look to anybody to tell me what I am. So they definitely can't tell me what to do. And I do kind of exist in multiple spaces because I'm just looking for I'm looking for partners who will support me in these inquiries and investigations, right? And I think that there is something about changing how we address time and making people stay still a little bit, that maybe that's a kind of radical act, or making people move slowly. But I guess I think that I so appreciate what activists are doing. Like even when you talk about Ken Saro-Wiwa, yes, I mean, he was definitely trying to make also the connection between global corporate oil interests and corrupt Nigerian autocracy or authoritarianism. I mean, particularly it was Sani Abacha who, was particularly noxious and had reigned in Nigeria from, I believe, the late 80s to the mid 90s when he died. But they killed Ken Saro-Wiwa, who was trying to also acknowledge that the extractive economy in Nigeria is killing the land. It's killing not only the capacity for people to survive and feed themselves, but it is destroying the land. I mean, and someone was talking about, when we had that huge spill in the Gulf of Mexico. I don't know what was not Valdez, because that's much older. But there's
been a couple.
there have been so many, right? But in Nigeria, the order of magnitude of those spills, that's happening like every week. And no one is addressing it. So Ken Saro-Wiwa was trying to, and also those spaces where they're extracting the oil, not only are they destroying the land and capacity for people who were fishermen or farmers to sustain themselves, but that the resources from that oil is not going to those people, right? It's going to the government, it's going up north. And so he was really trying to address that head on. And I think there are people who really people are coming really head on to say, this is the problem, see it, and these are my ideas for how to address it. I don't do that. And so that's only why I would say that I'm not an activist, because some of my work really is about sort of existing in a particular space and not thinking about time, not thinking about resolution or results. But maybe in that consideration of being in one space, being with each other, being in a kind of reverberation and a vibration. I'm not saying that can't in some way open up your capacity, right? To think and move through the world with empathy and care and a kind of a more open ear, more reflective and resonant flesh. I'm not saying, and that's what we want too, but I do feel like that there's specific work that I got to give props to activists for that I personally do not do. But Paul, I think artists, you're right. Like, if we are worth our salt, what we are trying to do is imagine differently, imagine more, imagine spaces that we haven't been in, open up ears, like I said, like get the pores open, like wake up the flesh, the mind, like exist in a way that's not in the kind of the conveyor belt, the rough, the tumult of like production. How do we get people to stay still, stay where they are, and be with each other?
I mean, Paul, I think it was really interesting, and I appreciate that you invited me into the conversation. But Okwui, I'm thinking about, with your research about the protests of the Igbo woman in the 20s, you were talking about how the language around protests would relate to dance.
Yes, people. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking about your installation in Grief and Grievance, and that iteration of Poor People's TV Room. And one of the words that you repeat, there's this line, and like it's like there's a ritual of repeating things that seem related to a protest that like carry the spirit of those women somehow. But there's this one line where you say, "Don't swear on no Bible, can't read your Bible," and then so you say, "I swear on a sword, I can read your sword." And I constantly think about your relationship to language with that, because there's a lot in your work that plays with language, but it's always embodied, it's always repeated. It's like to the point that like it becomes nonsense or demands a different kind of hearing it or thinking about it. And Paul, for me, that's interesting because there's literal politics to it, but it's also very unwritten. So perhaps it can't be like pragmatic. I'm not sure about that.
Well, it's true. First of all, yes, thank you to like my chat is up, Bridget and GE for pointing out it was the Deepwater Horizon BP spill, and that's British Petroleum. So I think that they were maybe held to an account in a way that maybe I don't know if American corporations would, but actually all of these corporations are multinational and they're all linked. So anyway, that thing is happening on the order of like once a week in Nigeria. Um, so as to even that language, so there is language, and I think that we talked about this the other day, right? So I have a book that is kind of a historical account. It's a collection of commissioned reports that the British did in the wake of this revolt or war that happened for 3 months because 50 women were killed. And so I have these reports that I've gone through. And as I was thinking about building Poor People's TV Room, the first thing I did was I made a 50-minute song. And that song was taking language from these commissioned reports. And one piece of it was that a woman would not swear on a Bible. She swore on a sword. And so what I took from it is, of course, you would not swear on a Bible. You would swear on a sword because there is something, to me, very clear about the way the colonial or imperial folks exercised power. And in that they might come with a Bible, but really behind it was a sword, right? And that the truth of what they were doing, the extraction, the taking of resources, was held together by the sword, not by the Bible. No matter how many times they would place the Bible in the front. So I thought it was interesting that this woman would not swear on a Bible; she would swear on a sword. And so also a lot of the problem with my looking at that text is that there were a number of women who didn't speak English. So already the text is mediated by a translator, right? And so there were already and then even I won't swear on a sword, I won't swear on a Bible, but I'll swear on a sword. I can read your sword. That's me. I added I can read your sword
Right.
because I did feel like truly that's what can be read, the sword. um but it's true that that whole 50-minute song was also a space of practice for me as I developed the work to see if I could access what is inaccessible, which is like, some kind of on a cellular level, can I make the space to open up a portal where I might faintly in the distance hear something, notice something, but it's crazy, but I want to do that, right? And while always acknowledging that it's maybe failing.
That's yeah. There's a lot to unpack because I'm really fascinated with the diaspora connection, and that's something me and Yasi have spoken about your work before as well. But the theater aspect and the way that you're thinking about song and interdisciplinary approach. There's other, if you look at sort of obviously someone who's resonant with your work is Bill T. Jones. Do you have any other kind of diaspora kind of observations of how people are thinking about your work in context of multimedia? Because it's like you're working on film quite a bit now as well. Just wanted to maybe talk about the evolution into film.
Yeah, I mean, I love Bill T. Jones. I mean, what an amazing man, and the support that New York Live Arts is giving to artists as they give them residencies and actually employ artists and give them space to build work. But it's funny, I feel like our work is so different, right? I feel like Bill T. is really sometimes coming out with a clear message and doing amazing things to sort of like bring Fela Kuti to the world, or back in the day when he did that piece Still Here, and he brought on bodies that were sick or suffering in some way, and had to contend with how the media believed dance should be executed, and he really kind of broke that open. Obviously also choreographies and duets with his partner, multiple men, even though I think Ted Shawn was also doing this in Jacob's Pillow. But yeah, Bill T. Jones is amazing, but I feel like my work might not be as ambitious as his. But I would say that the multimedia piece is so kind of critical right now because we couldn't be embodied with each other, right? So I had to figure something out, and my incredible partner, who is also my collaborator, Peter Bourne, has an incredible visual eye, the patience to argue, the patience that collaboration with a lover takes. So he and I feel like we're lucky in that, we were quarantined together, we could go up to the roof and I could sort of explore on the roof, on the fire escape. We were constantly kind of just trying to imagine, how do we hold on to like that. It's like, how do you hold on to the flesh when it's not the flesh, right? Like when it's this image of the flesh in the box. And so I think we came up for this design at the new museum where we did have a raffia sculpture inside, like it's just kind of multiple ghosts, possibilities of flesh that kind of I found really, really useful. And then of course, a lot of the video, there was my video of my body trying to in some way take on or take the place of some of these women at war. And also the space of there was something happening called the Ophala Festival in the village that my parents grew up in Nigeria, where this was you induct, people get chieftaincy titles and they're inducted into this hall, this space of elders called the Ichie. So both of my parents my mother was getting a chieftaincy title, my dad was being made an Ichie, and there are just tons of people come out and dance and celebrate this from all ages. So we have the grandmothers and we also have the young girls, but then we also mixed it in with some Nollywood pieces, like thinking about kind of how Nigeria is making its own culture, making its own space for a reflective, like the mirror turning onto itself, not needing to produce and just disseminate Western made things. So I'm interested in that. But I am also how to kind of never, for me, um, I don't know. I need to navigate that in between space. The diaspora is working on me all of the time. You know, that space of the unknown, the thing I want to capture. I know here in the United States, and Paul talked to me about this too, right? You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I do feel like often in conversations I have sometimes with some of my African American sisters is like, well, at least you know where your village is. You know where your home is, right? And I feel like, no, your home is here. And actually that knowledge you think I have, I don't necessarily have. I may know where my village is, but who are the gods that we prayed to? Do I like what are the links to the ancestors that are forever cut off because Christianity came, and then I don't speak the language, right? So I'm just saying that there's a kind of missing, an absence that is, I feel like, might be true throughout the diaspora that connects all of us, right? And I feel like in the new museum, because it was a space for grief and grievance, I feel like I was trying to touch on and reach out to the women that had a particular grievance. But maybe my grief is my missing and that absence, you know? But then trying to imagine it as a source of like an incredible generation, right? Like a generative capacity in that space of absence, right? Which to me is why African American culture is American culture, because the generativity in that space of absence and violence, it's I think it blows my mind. It blows my mind.
Okay, and that I want to just make sure we don't lose that one moment. So Yasi, just 2 seconds. Amusingly enough, what you were just talking about, there's a kind of like, I'm keep thinking of a term for you, like convergent theater is one, sort of, there's a whole ideas of action theater. But if you look at Brian Eno's interpretation and David Byrne from the Talking Heads, they did an interpretation of My Life in the Bush of Ghosts by Amos Tutuola.
I love that. Yes.
Right. So, okay.
That's a great album. What?
Right.
And I've been reading, yes.
Okay, so and also Wole Soyinka is doing a lot of theater in Nigeria as well. So if you want to riff on that album, because I actually think it's a nice touchstone for interdisciplinary, because you're dealing with music, you're dealing with theater, you're dealing with dance. Those are things David's been doing a lot of work with, obviously, with Afro-Brazilian stuff, and Brian Eno has been doing, the My Life in the Bush of Ghosts and the book, both of them where that kind of interdisciplinary conversation, I think, is resonant with your work too. I just was riffing on that for a second.
Oh my gosh, man! I have to tell you, I love that album, and I was listening to that album a lot before I was making Poor People's TV Room, but also because the book itself, we have, sort of the father, the grandfather of, Nigerian literature, Chinua Achebe, who is also Igbo, right? And his Things Fall Apart, really trying to make a kind of pre-colonial culture in Nigeria legible for the Western world. And here is Amos Tutuola, like just not interested in legibility, but interested in the mystery and what is confounding. One of my favorite stories in that book is the story of a girl in the marketplace who refused to marry anybody, but then this like incredibly dressed gentleman walks into the marketplace and she's like, that's the one I want, and follows him, starts to follow him. And he's like, every time he turns back, he's like, look, stop following me. You know what I mean? You don't want none of this. And she's just like, man. And he's just like, he keeps going and going. And she's like, he's like, stop following me. I told you to stop following me. She's like, man. And then he gets to the edge of the bush. Now the bush is the place where, that's where the spirit world and the earth world meet. That's the opening. That's the I don't even want to say purgatory, but again, the space of possibility, a space of horror, terror, and amazement. So they get to the edge of the bush. That's also where in Igbo culture, that's where the taboos would go. That's where if somebody had done something that was terrible to the community, they would put them in the bush, or they would leave them out in the bush. They wouldn't bury them. They would just be out there rotting. Anyway, they get to the edge of the forest, and the bush, and he says, if you come any further, you're not going to be able to turn back. He takes that step into the bush. He goes into the bush. She comes with him, and he's like, all right. He stops at he stops at one place, meets somebody, and is like, here you go. Takes off an arm, gives it to that person. And she's like, what? And he goes to the next person, takes off another arm, gives it to that person. So apparently he's been renting parts of his body. And of course, at this point, she's like, I want to turn back. She can't, right? She is now enthralled. Until finally, he is nothing. He has taken off his skin. He has given everything. All he is a bouncing skull. And there is no justification. There's no thing in Amos Tutuola's book that's like, well, the reason he becomes a bouncing skull is, and the tradition of the bouncing skull. It's just like, no, you are confronted with a skull, and now that woman is in a village of skulls and is trying to figure out how she can get out. And so this book, it's just so. And I feel that Brian Eno and David Byrne, in making My Life in the Bush of Ghosts, really delve into that space. It's so, again, I feel like they open up the landscape, right? And it's almost as if it's their encounter with the bush. And I love that. And so, yeah, no, that's all I'll say about that, man, because that's a good one.
Well, I thought it was a touchstone to your work because there's this idea of African surrealism and horror that's coming back now. Like if you look at Jordan Peele's film, Get Out, or Boots Riley, Sorry to Bother You, where there's now this kind of Afro-surrealism or Afro, dealing with like the horror, the edge of the American dream. Obviously, there's a one on, is it HBO, where there's a Cthulhu
the Lovecraft Country? I haven't seen that.
Lovecraft Country. So your work doesn't go into horror or anything, but it definitely has that edge of like anxiety about the physical and the mythological sort of overhanging it.
It totally goes into horror.
Yeah.
If you sit for 30 minutes watching somebody shake in darkness, because we work a lot with shadow, there's a kind of horror. But it's true that. Sorry.
Go ahead. No. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I think the body is the space. I think that, yes, I want to make sure that our bodies, how do we open up all of the ways, the woundings, right? Without me saying, you've wounded me, right? But how can I, like, the porousness, the wounds, the scratches, to take time can be horror to some people.
Yeah.
To be forced to be in a particular, but I don't want it to only be horror. There's horror, there might be elation, there might be a sense of, oh, my body is doing that too. I wouldn't want to have any space in the consciousness, the emotion, the psyche, kept from the experience of my work. I hope to have it all open and potentially open up.
I mean, I was just thinking about your part in Random Acts of Flyness. I'm like, it's pretty. There's a lot of it.
I got a tiny little part, but I love that.
It's intense.
Yeah.
Unexpected, nothing less. No, but I'm also. It's interesting to then also think about the post-colonial kind of like the third world experience. So I'm thinking about, and it's so special. I'm thinking about On the Way Undone, so your recent performance at Highline, and Samita Sin was there, and there's like all these different people who think about singing in different cultures, but also recalling what has been erased through your body in an embodied way. And it was in the honor of the closing or the end of Simone Weil's magnificent sculpture. But I was thinking, like, right before, like in February, you interviewed The Rail and you were talking about practice, how it's important for you to think about all of this in relationship to practice. And then March comes, COVID is happening. I'm thinking about your conversation with on slowness and talking about how that whole thing was about spitting on each other, like breathing with each other, and how none of that is possible. And Louis, if we can have this image of the Highline performance, that'll be great, or have it in the chat. but I'm thinking about this pilgrimage to, so if you keep going, it is there. I'm thinking about this pilgrimage to Simone Lee. I'm thinking about people getting close to you or far away and deciding if they can keep up. And like you talked about this, you've been talking about this for a long time. It's like, is it a multitude? Is it contradictory? Is it intense? Is it scary? Is it beautiful? I'm also thinking about this. There's one thing that repeats on your album, Day Pulls Down the Sky, and like the audio component of Poor People's TV Room, and that's Follow Me. And in Follow Me, you constantly talk about this spirit that has lost its feet, and being the feet of this spirit. And there's something about being haunted by that really made me think about this edge you were talking about.
Yes. I mean, it's definitely, the spirit who lost its feet, I'm definitely riffing on the Amos Tutuola space, right? But also thinking about how the spirits that you don't visit start to lose their ability to be connected to the living world, right? In the living, so in like a kind of pre-colonial Igbo culture, right? You feed the ancestors. You have space to sort of be in relation and community with them, because then they die a second death, and so it's sort of, so I'm thinking about losing the feet, but I'm also thinking about losing ground, losing connection, and so yes, this image is also like that movement to the incredible brick house sculpture, which is where because I'm thinking I've been creating and working on another piece around a young girl with hair, like another place of contention for Black women and hair. The discipline continues of our bodies, where we have to straighten, ply it, pull it. And so I was actually thinking about a space where hair becomes illuminated. I was thinking about West African threading styles and having the head and the hair in the future, right? And singing a future song to us in the present while going to this brick house, this sculpture. And some of the lyrics are, I'm going to carry on, I'm going to carry one, I'm going to carry all. There are a number of things. So yeah, and you can see that there are, I had initially, my idea was that the sound would come from, so there are these, it's like sort of this it's metal and it's woven with thread, but then there are also mirrors. But my idea was that could sound come out of the head. So because we're in front, right, the idea that the sound is coming from, and the audience is behind us, so the sound would be coming from a kind of future. I mean, not to like sort of make the future, confine it to a linear time, but in this case, yes, thinking of the sound coming from the head. So, because we weren't able to kind of manage that for now, we, my husband constructed also these wooden kind of tiny wagons that held the speakers, that we were kind of plugged into the speakers and sounding from them, so that the sound was always still coming from ahead of you. Yeah,
so, hey,
but
Okwui,
yeah.
I want to unpack I love the way you speak with this sort of synecdoche, where it's almost like that we could almost unpack every other couple words. So I just want to make sure to ground the audience. I mean, there's a very famous phrase from Ben Okwui where he says, "Magic becomes art when it has nothing to hide." And I love the sensibility that you're dealing with, both on one hand, the sort of the legacy of hair, the legacy of the body. These are all things that inform young African-American women's experience in America, but also in Africa and so on. But the eerie thing about this notion of being in a context of a narrative-driven society right now. Again, Juneteenth, I love the fact that we're speaking on June 18th, and
Right.
tomorrow, it's the first time they actually tracked down the woman who actually helped inspire that. And every day she did a march to try and get the holiday done. And so finally she actually, when Obama, yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead.
No. Is it Opal Green or something? She's like 93 right now or something.
Yeah, she's up there. Yeah.
No, but go ahead. No.
No, but she marched. She did a whole kind of spectacle of marching to the White House when Obama was president. I thought, again, that has a resonance. There's, again, I actually do think of you as an activist, like someone who's a catalyst. So I'd still love to kind of riff on that, given the time frame. I know it's almost 2 o'clock, so I just want to also make sure about how are we for time, everybody?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Nick and is everybody cool?
I think there's a few questions, but I think we have time to like have this.
Yeah.
Paul, if that's okay, I have a final question too.
Yeah,
But
but I
then,
love this thing about the march and walking, right? Because I
Right.
do slow walks. I'm doing something
Right.
this weekend at LMCC. It's a slow walk. What is it to sort of be together and to walk and to insist? Just like that insistence, right, is really impressive to me. And what Miss Opal did is impressive. And there's just something about the walks, like the Edmund Pettus Bridge. You know, all of these women in Nigeria in 1929, they walked from village to village and, you know, gathered and collected more and more people to go to the colonial outposts in Aba. They so I love that you say I speak in synecdoche. I do think that maybe I don't always pull people through my narratives because it's all I feel like the pieces I make though aren't necessarily going to help anybody. I don't know. They're not. I don't know.
I think they help
See, like
people.
now I'm not no, but I mean that I'm not trying to bring people along in a particular narrative. I am trying to open up spaces, and I am kind of thinking like, well, do I make more of a narrative? I feel like Bronx Gothic was very narrative. It was very narrative driven. Bridget, she walked with me. Oh my gosh. See, look at me trying not to look at these chats.
love it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't know, Paul. I mean, huh.
I mean,
Oh, well,
it's interesting because that makes me think about your
It's
relationship.
too bad we didn't even talk about all of your work, Paul's work, Yassi's work. Were we supposed to do
We're
that?
still here forever. No, I don't think
no,
so.
part two. That's another time.
Yeah, but no, I mean, this conversation makes me think about your relationship to Sadia Hartman and her writing on like Riot and Refrain, like these women who are in enclosure and their act of protest is making noise, and how they get written about. And it's like the U.S., it's the 20s, but this like noise that is physical.
Yes.
So this is the thing that if I don't ask it, I'm going to cry, Paul. So sorry to take space.
It's all good.
But I was thinking about Fred Moten talking about language of the unheard and quoting Martin Luther King and like riots being the language of the unheard. And he was like really focusing on like, what do we even mean by the language of the unheard? And at one point, he posed this question of like, what does it mean to be in a riot or in a protest? Do you listen to yourself? Do you listen to the group, or can you even separate it? And the conversation kind of opened to this question of what does it mean to do improvisation with a group? Do you listen to yourself? Do you listen to the group? Or do you listen to your instrument? And we ended up in this whole argument as a group, or like a discussion of like, what is active listening? I'm also thinking about that in relationship to how Sadia deals with the archive, an archive that has completely erased the life of these women and trying to bring their body back, which is something that is really deep in your work and your relationship to narrative. I'm also thinking about M. Norbise Phillips and her Zong, and thinking about the archives around Zong and the lack of narratives, and how she emphasizes that she has to stay unsilenced, to think about how these people were silenced, how adding the narrative is another act of violence to speak for them. Like, how do you deal with these ghosts? So I want to hear your thoughts on riots.
Right. I mean, I think, first of all, I think that we need the flood sometimes. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes what we need is a space to not understand and to not know. The space where the folks involved are in a kind of argument with each other, but are also moving in concert with each other. And I think sometimes like the only thing that brings attention is the flood. It's just like sometimes everything has to be raised. I wish that wasn't the case. I don't want that, but it's as if it's like the flood changes everything. That's all I can think about that. And I think that the truth of the fragments is that that's how we're receiving our information, to make connective tissue, to starts to kind of build an idea of resolution. These lives were never resolved. They were just violently ended. You know what I mean? So there's something also, how do we kind of honor, yes, not redoing the violence, but also not putting a pretty sort of finish around it. There is no finish. There is no, do you know what I mean? You know, when you think about, particularly when I think we were talking about Venus in Two Acts, and when we think about the young girls who are violently raped during the Middle Passage, some of them sick, maybe thrown overboard, maybe murdered, right? Like, what if we're going to in any way try to excavate that life? How and the only way we also encounter in that life is in the records of the people who did the violence and don't recognize that life as anything other than kind of chattel that is no longer, you know, salvageable. Like I mean, if you don't approach that with a stutter, you're not human. In my mind, like you've got there that and even Juneteenth, right? Like when we say, it's, someone had said something, and I was listening to something, that it's both a celebration but an ache. These were two years or 2.5 years of people who were still enslaved when they could have been free. Some of them dead, never reached that, right? It's like, that's a stutter and an ache that you've got to think about that.
No, you're touching on some powerful material. I mean, there's a whole layer of like the kind of literary aspect that you're kind of talking about, and I want to make sure to respect time. So Yasi, do you have any?
No,
there's so many.
I'll stay with stutter. Yeah.
Okay, stutter is very cool.
Floods and stutter. I'm good.
So just by way of like kind of transitioning a little bit, Okwui, I mean, there's several major authors who I always see resonant in your work as well. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie with Americana. Of course, Ben Okri, you know, with that quote, I said magic.
The famished road.
Yeah, the famished road. Do you have any more current, like where do you see yourself in the next couple, like next year, 2 years? What's in the future?
I just keep making this, I keep sort of making that work that is around On the Way Undone and Poor People's TV Room.
Okay.
I keep making that work, and also thinking about sonic space and thinking about the flood. And the stutter. I mean, but I do think, but also what for me is interesting is, okay, can you make a piece, like a performative theatrical piece that also has the space for improvisation, right? That also, like, especially when I'm not by myself, but how to set up frameworks and scores sonically, because I think I understand how to do it physically in the body, how to set up a score. But find a way to make space for the unexpected and the unknown in the sonic space. So I'm wondering about that. I mean, and you know, and obviously this is your space, Paul. I feel like I'm also quite, you know, I'm a neophyte. I follow what I love. Do you know what I mean?
Well,
I just follow it without, you know. So I'm working to figure out what that is, I think.
Okay. Well, if you ever need advice, I'm always around.
All right, man. Can you tell me how to put speakers that can project really great sound inside of a headpiece?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a new technology called Dolby Atmos that actually does all this sort of surround sound. Apple has it now built into the Mac AirPods Pro, where you have, it's called sonic spatialization. But that's probably a whole different conversation. But yeah, Yasi, you have any fun? I mean, I have so many questions, comments. I wouldn't know. I don't want to overstep everybody's different zones and stuff. Yasi, you want to jump in for a moment, or?
No, I'm really, Okwui, thank you. Thank you for making this time. I just want to make sure we leave time for questions. I think some people will have questions for us. So Paul, if that's okay, if we open up to the Q&A, great. Thank you so much, Okwui. Flood.
Thank you. You guys, really, wow. Thank you for being so thorough in all of, I'm so grateful for your eyes and your presence in relationship to my work. Yeah, because you all have stunning work yourselves. So thank you. And thank you, Brooklyn Rail.
Yeah, so Nick and Jess, how do you guys want to transition to questions?
Yeah, we have a couple from the audience. So we're going to start off with Meredith Palmer. Meredith, you should be able to unmute.
Well, I think you actually answered some of the question, which was, what is your next project? I was really thrilled with your piece at the new museum. It was my favorite in the whole show. It was really, really beautiful and very special.
Thank you.
So I was curious what in addition to what you said, if you have a particular piece or project that you're working on now, other than the general comments you just made.
Yeah. I'm working on a story of Adaku, which means daughter of wealth. And she is the one who has the hair. There's the hair. Again, as you saw in the Highline piece, working
Right.
on what it means to traverse multiple futures and also pasts, and what is she communicating, what is she learning. She basically has hair that grows and gives her the capacity for time travel. Again, more magic, more
Wow.
wildness. But when
Yeah,
she
they
goes
are
to the
magical.
past, what's that about, right? So part of what I'm structuring right now is that this girl goes back to the past to go to missing girls, where girls have been missing.
Mm.
um,
That's
so
great.
so anyway, so this is what I'm working on, and hopefully it's supposed to be a BAM, my first BAM commission.
Really, I love
20
BAM.
2023. Yes, Carla. Yes. So
That sounds
working on
beautiful.
that.
I look
Thank you.
forward to that.
Thank you, Meredith. Thank you.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Meredith. I also have a question that I'd like to ask. So, Okwui, you have such a multifaceted practice, and so I'm wondering what kinds of activities or things help to ground you or serve as a grounding force. I know that you mentioned that something always feels missing in diaspora, and it's also often conceptualized as an in-between space. So, what sort of becomes your anchor?
Oh my gosh. The 7-minute well exercises that the Times put out, like just some of that, just because I realize that as I'm getting older, um, the capacity to do things for long periods of time, actually I'm like my body, I have to work, I have to do body work, actually. So that's been really helpful. Singing, I'm doing a lot of sounding and singing. My partner builds different soundscapes and I play with that. I sometimes compel, or maybe some people would say force. I have a 9-year-old daughter who has a beautiful capacity to improvise, and we do little improvisations together sonically. Um, what else? I should see friends more often. I read. I read. I sing. I should take more walks. I don't know. What do I do? I don't know. Just the well exercises, I definitely do that. I've been doing handstands.
Wow, that's amazing. I've been trying to do a handstand for years at this point, but I think it's a futile effort.
You need a wall. I don't do it out. I don't do it. I don't do it freestyle. I get against a wall, honey. It's not that hard with a wall.
I think
Trust.
we're getting some real answers by the end of this interview. We found your headphones, like just found out how to do the headstand. Yeah.
So wrapping
Yeah.
up our Q&A, our very own Nick Bennett has a question. Nick, take it away.
Hi, well, thank you for this brilliant conversation that we shared with the public. I hope my question is not too vague, but my question is, in thinking of how your work has been presented in a sense of curation or I think just in general presentation, what are some, sorry for the barking dog.
You better love that dog.
I do. All barks and all. Sorry, I got distracted there. But what I'm curious about is how would you love for a work to be presented or curated, or are there venues or spaces that you haven't presented your work, and if so, like what would they be?
Gosh, Nick, why did you say that was general? That feels very specific. Um,
I confused.
yeah, yeah. You've confused general with specific all the time. It's is that what you said?
Yeah.
um, yeah, that's hard.
Maybe not like a specific place, but I like
No, I'm thinking of, because this is my issue with museum spaces, right? Because I have been in conversation actually with some incredible performance curators at MoMA, Anna Janevsky, Thomas Lack, Stuart Comer, because they've built a new space. I think right now they have this incredible artist. What is it? Oh, I'm forgetting. Sung Juan. Oh, I'm totally fucking that up. Sorry. there is an incredible artist in the space right now called Sung Hwan Kim, Temper Clay. Um, so that's happening. So they've built a new space, and there's a space that they're also going to use for residency. So I've been working with them to sort of figure out what are the conditions where we can go in there and practice, and figure out and how much of that practice has to be exposed to the public, because it is a museum, right? That's part of the mission, not just archiving, collecting, and somehow sharing that collection, but how do they work with performers, to kind of just in a thinking space and a thinking practice, especially when so many of us don't have our own studios. We don't have, you know, we find our practices, you know, we get 2 hours here, 3 hours here. If you have, you know, like I said, I use my roof, I use my living room. And so I think museum spaces are starting to recognize that, you know, performance and bodies, living bodies, are kind of vital in charging the museum space. But how do they? I feel like some people are really looking critically in Whitney at how to support bodies or give bodies the sort of privilege that they give to objects. Um, so yeah, so I don't know, but I'm trying to think through these things with folks, and particularly the time and the energy it takes to make a performance, to understand who's going to be a part of the performance, who are the collaborators going to be, how much time do you have to just really mess up, to really not know, you know? And like I said, Mansi Carla Peterson is here. She is like I wonder if she would call herself the executive director of this choreographic center in Florida, which their mission is not to present, but just to give space to people to not know and practice. And so, that would be helpful. That's what I would want from institutions, right? Oh, my battery is dying on my computer, but I know, I'm just like, oh shoot, that said your computer's gonna shut off. Okay. So yeah, I guess, yeah, Nick, what is that? What, you know, can more spaces, museum spaces, residency spaces, producing houses, um, facilitate performance, dance work, movement work, where artists cannot know, you know?
You know, actually, this you just made me think of, like, we were talking about kind of like the whole black horror kind of thing, and the way that you were looking at the body frozen in space at a certain moment. What do you think of people like Octavia Butler's work? Obviously, I mean, there's some resonance there as well, in sort of Afro-futurist or science fiction narratives too. There's this. That's probably my last question, because we're looking at, you know, this idea of different potentialities and futures, which I think again your work kind of evokes. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Octavia Butler feels so prescient, but then also Sam Delaney, you know, and the kind of, you know, wildness, and you know, the dense violence, and power, that works through his work. Yeah, or even Cormac McCarthy, Toni Morrison. I feel like is a kind of future writer. Like maybe all Black writers are kind of future, or the writers I like are futuristic. But I love Octavia Butler, and the way she just weaves, that she builds. She can build the future, right? Coming from all of the pain and the destruction and violence of what we are now, right? It's like she projects, and you know, I feel like she's like an oracle, being like, be careful because this is coming, you know what I mean? So she's interesting in that way.
Okay. And there's
all of these people, yeah.
Okay, I just was putting that out there as a kind of
and N.K. Jemisin. I have to read N.K. Jemisin. Someone just brought, yeah. Is that you, GE? Look at you, just throwing stuff out there. Yes, but I need to read N.K. Jemisin as well.
It's also, to go back to what Nick was saying, Okwui, I was thinking about our first email interaction. You sent us like a list of like potential things to think about. And one of them was the tension between the urgency of engaging in deep practice and deploying a product.
Yes.
We're still there.
That's exactly, yes.
It's just there.
That's what thank you for pointing that out.
Quoting you to you.
Because that's where I always am. But I mean, we live in this space and time. It's so interesting. I was like, has this pandemic taught us nothing? Because I feel like now people are like, oh, we can open up again. We still have the virtual space. Now we have the live space. Now do everything. I'm just kind of like, whoa, why? Like, whoa, whoa. So yeah, there's that.
Yeah.
So now it's like multiple products. Not only do you have to try to project a project in the virtual space, but then there's also what, people want your body to be doing in the live space. And it's just like, how do we get out of this kind of capital sort of object production kind of like, I don't know, squish machine? Is that a thing? It could be a thing, squish machine. Get out of the squish machine, folks. Yes.
There's actually
yes,
very
waste
similar.
Time.
It's very similar to William S. Burroughs' novel, The Soft Machine. But
that's it. I haven't read that.
It's a great piece. He's always dealing with the body in these sort of media coercive fields. Him and William Gibson are two of my favorite novelists. But there's, to me at least, I know just time we have like anybody have any last quick questions? We have a master here with us, so we have please, audience, last
no mastery, master me, no.
All right, anybody going once, going twice? All right.
But someone did just say, Ty just said, thinking about the way virtual school is proposing the removal of snow days for students, young students.
That's like to say Ty is our poet of the day, so they have a poem for us.
Yes, Ty.
Yes, that is right. It is a perfect time to go to poetry. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading, and I'm thrilled to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Ty Cooper, to the stage, who will be reading a poem by Leopoldine Kaur. Leopoldine Kaur is the author of the poetry collection Veronica Bench and the story collection When Watched. She teaches at NYU and Columbia. Ty, take it away.
Hi all. Thank you so much, Okwui, and thank you, Yasi and Paul. Today has been really just electric. Thank you both, or thank you all. There's 3 today. As Jess mentioned, today I'm going to be reading a poem by Leopoldine Kaur called Pear Trees. Oh, and someone is lumbering up my stairs, so I hope that that's not too loud.
I don't hear it.
Pear trees. I feel like no one ever wants them. Mother, maybe. I cannot read it. I think maybe she is feeding them. The black fish in her hands look like grenades or boxing gloves. Also, she isn't female, but her shirt says mother. The woman is stone and the background looks fine with it. Her basket is full and her hands are full. The tree is full. There's too much heavy fruit to deal with, and it's so overly yellow. There is a caterpillar on the ground, and the frog does not look like a frog. It looks like a person, or the mouse, rabbit, dog thing about to get hit with a pear. I think it's about the bearing of fruit and its responsibilities, and the stress of abundance or the desire for it. The tree is advancing without them, like disco. The fruit is so huge and muscular or bulbous. It's not clear the gender of fruit, it's just fruit. But it's drawn in a way where it's full on boobs or balls or asses, hips. Also, the basket seems subtly bloody. It seems to speak to body parts. What kind of fruit is it? They are not clearly pears. They could be lemons or squash. They seem to be swinging wildly. They are falling off because they are ripe or ready to be taken. There is one woman, one rabbit dog, one frog man, one caterpillar, one energetic tree, and many pears imposing their creation. That's the color of paper. The situation is floating. You have to deal with the intensity of this moment, now. And it does hit you. There's nowhere to hide. She lived in a rural place and used mud to make her own clay. She had a very disturbing medical situation where she was pregnant and did not give birth and never really dealt with it, or didn't know how, or had bad care. I'm not sure. But she retained the fetus. It stayed inside her, so she was sick from this. Are they moving a boulder with their noses? I always think that's the sun. I don't know what her life was like. Maybe something else happened. I heard she gave herself an abortion by drinking lye, but then took on the look of a pregnant woman afterward. They said the fetus calcified. I might be remembering a little wrong. I'm not sure. I don't know her story, but it's somehow in there when you look. The trees seem imagined by the woman, and she really makes you wonder, is this finished? Things not filled in. It's very hard to say. The combination of fantasy and hard reality is something I understand. It seems simple. It is not. Part of selfhood is a place. She is obsessed with the two trees. The sun seems to have crashed to earth always like a giant beach ball. Sometimes people seem invisible. They are not. There's this place that is open to everybody because it is no place. She is openly, rudely thinking, you are the birds, the walk, staring continuously. Might be able to get one pair for cheap since it's so scary and makes people question what is. She's wearing the wrong shoes for that work. Or maybe the chunky heels are good so she can reach more pairs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Ty. That was amazing.
Thank you.
And thank
Wow.
you, Okwui. Thank you, Yasi. Thank you, Paul. This was an incredible conversation. And thank you to everyone in the audience today who tuned in today and for your questions. Join us Monday at 1 p.m. for a conversation between Jerome Reyes and Jessamine Botario. We'll conclude with a poetry reading. You can now turn on your microphone and...
Oh, by the way, I have one tiny little thing I want to add. Just happy Juneteenth, everybody. So,
Yay! Happy Juneteenth.
just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you, Paul. And everyone should be able to unmute and say goodbye as you leave.
Thank you
Thank you,
so much,
Okwui.
Okwui.
Thank you, Okwui.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yasi and
Thank you,
Paul.
Yasi.
No, I know.
Thank you, everyone.
Beautiful. Thank you, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Yasi.
Happy
Bye,
weekend.
everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Happy Juneteenth.
Happy Juneteenth.
Happy Juneteenth.
Bye, Oku.
Hello, Rail team.
Bye.
Hey, Jason.
AJ.